October 9, 1999. The evening air hung heavy with humidity across Houston, Texas, where the sounds of Friday night traffic mixed with music drifting from open windows in the Montrose neighborhood. 22-year-old Charles Witherspoon locked the front door of Reverie Books, the independent bookstore where he worked as assistant manager, checking his watch as he pocketed his keys. The drive home to his apartment on West Alabama Street should have taken 10 minutes. Charles had made the journey countless times, a simple route through the heart of Montrose that his roommate Devin could navigate blindfolded. But on this ordinary Friday evening, as temperatures cooled to a pleasant 72 degrees and the city prepared for the weekend ahead, something went terribly wrong. By 11:30 that night, when Charles hadn't arrived home or answered his pager, Devin's concern turned to panic. By 1:15 in the morning, Houston Police Department had initiated a missing person investigation. By dawn, over 60 volunteers were searching every street, parking lot, and alley in Montrose. What began as a missing person case would become Houston's most haunting unsolved mystery for 25 years, a case that saw investigators chase hundreds of leads, interview thousands of witnesses, and exhaust every resource available to late 90s forensic science. Then, in September 2024, a breakthrough that stunned not just Houston but law enforcement agencies across Texas, a confession from a dying man and a decades-old storage unit, would finally answer the question that had tormented the Witherspoon family and the entire Montrose community for a quarter century. Who killed Charles Witherspoon? Before we dive deep into this shocking case and reveal the arrest that no one saw coming, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. This channel brings you the most compelling cold case investigations, and I don't want you to miss what happens next in this extraordinary story of persistence, determination, and a truth that emerged in the most unexpected way possible. Charles David Witherspoon was born on April 6, 1977, in Austin, Texas, to Robert and Patricia Witherspoon, the middle child of 3, with an older sister named Sarah and a younger brother named Marcus. Charles arrived as what his mother called our gentle soul and our dreamer. From his earliest days, Charles displayed a personality that friends and family described as thoughtful. He had this way of really listening to people, Patricia Witherspoon would later tell investigators. Teachers loved him because he asked questions that showed he was thinking deeply about things. Friends were drawn to him because he made you feel heard and understood. Growing up in a modest home in South Austin, Charles attended local public schools where he excelled in English and history classes. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Rebecca Santos, recognized his talent early. Charles had a gift for language, Santos recalled in a 2000 interview. He could take complex ideas and express them in ways that were both beautiful and accessible. I encouraged him to pursue writing seriously. By the time he graduated from Lanier High School in 1995, Charles had already decided to major in English literature. He enrolled at the University of Texas at Austin that fall, living at home to save money and commuting to campus daily. His college years were marked by academic success and deepening literary passion. Charles discovered writers who would shape his worldview: Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Virginia Woolf. He spent hours in the university library, reading not just his assigned texts but exploring tangentially, following connections from one author to another in a way his professors found remarkable. His professor, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, remembered him as exceptionally insightful with a gift for literary analysis. Charles had this rare ability to see connections between texts that other students missed, Chen recalled in a 2000 interview. He wrote a senior thesis on narrative unreliability in postmodern fiction that was genuinely publishable quality. He was planning to apply to graduate programs. He wanted to teach literature at the university level someday. During his senior year, Charles began contemplating his next steps. Graduate school was the obvious path, but he wasn't sure he was ready to commit to another 4 or 5 years of academic work immediately. He wanted to live independently, to experience life outside the academic bubble, to write creatively, and see if he had a future as a writer beyond scholarly analysis. In May 1999, Charles graduated from the University of Texas with honors. That summer, he made a decision that would change the trajectory of his life. His college friend Devin Martinez was moving to Houston to take a job in graphic design and invited Charles to come along, to split rent on an apartment and explore the city together. Charles accepted, Houston offered opportunities Austin didn't: a larger literary community, more independent bookstores and publishers, a thriving arts scene in neighborhoods like Montrose. In July 1999, Charles and Devin moved into a small two-bedroom apartment on West Alabama Street in Montrose. The neighborhood was perfect for Charles, eclectic and artistic, filled with coffee shops, galleries, used bookstores, and the kind of dive bars where writers and artists congregated. Charles loved walking the streets, browsing the record stores on Westheimer, discovering new restaurants in the mix of old bungalows and modern apartments that defined Montrose's character. Within 2 weeks of arriving, Charles found a job at Reverie Books, an independent bookstore on Fairview Street that specialized in literary fiction, poetry, and small press publications. The owner, Margaret Sullivan, hired Charles immediately after their interview. I knew within 5 minutes he was exactly what I needed, Sullivan would later recall. He knew books, really knew them, and more importantly, he loved them. He could talk to customers about literature in a way that made them excited to read. He was perfect for the bookstore. By October 1999, Charles was thriving in every aspect of his young life. He worked 40 hours a week at Reverie Books, spending his days helping customers discover new authors, processing shipments of new releases, and organizing readings with local writers. He had joined a writers' group that met every Saturday morning at Brazil Cafe on Westheimer, a diverse collection of poets, novelists, and essayists who critiqued each other's work over strong coffee. He had started dating a woman named Jessica Chen, a photographer he'd met at a gallery opening in September. He was writing regularly, working on a collection of interconnected short stories set in Austin and Houston. He was exactly where he wanted to be, his sister Sarah would tell police. He loved Houston, loved working at the bookstore, loved being surrounded by books and other writers. He'd call home every Sunday and just talk for an hour about the books he was reading, the stories he was writing, the people he was meeting. He was happy. He was building the life he wanted. The Witherspoon family was close despite the geographical distance. Robert worked as an accountant in Austin, while Patricia taught 3rd grade at an elementary school near their home. They had raised their children to be independent and supportive of each other's choices. When Charles decided to move to Houston, rather than immediately pursue graduate school, they supported him completely. Sarah, 3 years older than Charles, worked as a nurse in San Antonio and spoke with her brother at least twice a week. Marcus, 2 years younger, was finishing his undergraduate degree at Texas State University and looked up to Charles as a role model. Friday evenings, Charles typically closed the bookstore, then headed home to the apartment where he and Devin would order takeout and watch movies or discuss the books they were reading. Devin worked long hours at his graphic design job, so Friday nights were their time to catch up, to talk about their weeks, to maintain the friendship that had brought them to Houston together. That particular Friday, October 9th, had started like countless others before it. Charles opened the bookstore at 9 in the morning, working through the quiet early hours, restocking shelves and updating inventory records. By midday, customer traffic picked up as it usually did on Fridays. Charles helped a regular customer find a first edition of a Cormac McCarthy novel, recommended a debut author to a woman looking for something new, and spent 20 minutes discussing postmodern literature with a graduate student from Rice University. The store owner, Margaret Sullivan, worked alongside him until 6 in the evening, then prepared to leave for the weekend. Margaret Sullivan's account of that evening, given to police within hours of Charles's disappearance, and repeated consistently over the years, painted a picture of normalcy. Charles was completely fine when I left at 6. We'd had a good day, decent sales, and he was in a great mood. He was looking forward to the weekend because his writers' group was meeting on Saturday, and he'd finished a short story he was excited to share. We talked about a book order that was coming in on Monday. He was making plans to organize a reading event for November. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. After Margaret left, Charles continued serving the evening customers. Reverie Books stayed open until 9 on Friday nights, catching the dinner crowd from nearby restaurants and the early nightlife traffic in Montrose. A handful of regular customers came and went. Charles rang up sales, answered questions about upcoming releases, and chatted with familiar faces about books and writing. According to the bookstore's alarm system logs, Charles armed the security system at 9:47 in the evening. Surveillance footage from inside the store, grainy by modern standards but clear enough, showed Charles turning off lights, checking the cash register one final time, counting out the till and preparing the deposit bag for Monday, and exiting through the front door at 9:46. He appeared calm, unhurried, routine. He locked the door behind him, tested it to make sure it was secure, and walked around the side of the building toward the small parking lot in back where employees parked. From Reverie Books on Fairview Street to Charles's apartment on West Alabama was a drive of approximately 2.3 miles through Montrose's residential streets. Charles drove a 1992 green Honda Accord that he'd owned since college, a reliable if unremarkable car that his father had helped him buy during his sophomore year. His typical route took him down Fairview to Montrose Boulevard, then west on West Alabama. The drive usually took between 8 and 12 minutes depending on traffic lights. Charles knew every turn, every landmark. He'd driven it nearly every night for the past 3 months. Witness statements collected in the days following Charles's disappearance provided a troubling timeline. Robert Chen, a man walking his dog on Fairview Street, reported seeing Charles lock the bookstore door and walk toward the small parking lot behind the building at approximately 9:48. "I saw him almost every Friday night," Chen stated. "He always parked in the same spot in the back lot. That night was no different. He waved at me like he usually did. He seemed fine, normal. Maybe a little tired from a long week, but nothing unusual." The next confirmed sighting came from a woman named Jennifer Martinez who was leaving a restaurant on Montrose Boulevard. She told investigators she had stopped at a red light at the intersection of Fairview and Montrose around 9:55 and noticed a green Honda Accord pulled over on the side of the road with its hazard lights on. There was someone standing by the driver's side window talking to whoever was inside, Martinez stated. "I remember thinking maybe someone was asking for directions or maybe the car had broken down. The person outside was gesturing, seemed to be talking in an animated way. I didn't think anything of it at the time. It looked like a normal interaction. I've thought about that moment 1,000 times since then, wishing I'd paid more attention, wishing I'd seen something that could have helped." Cell phone technology in 1999 was far less ubiquitous than it would later become. Charles didn't own a cell phone. He carried a pager, which Devin would later tell police was typical for Charles, who preferred the simplicity and lower cost. The last person to page Charles was Devin himself, at 10:30, wondering when Charles would be home so they could decide what to order for dinner. The page was never returned. By 11, Devin began to worry. Charles was reliable, punctual, the kind of person who called if he was going to be late. By 11:30, when Charles still hadn't arrived home or called from a payphone, Devin called the bookstore. No answer. He then called Charles's parents in Austin, hoping perhaps Charles had decided to drive there for the weekend without mentioning it, though that would have been completely out of character. Robert and Patricia hadn't heard from their son since their usual Sunday call. "They're going to think I'm overreacting," Devin would later tell police he thought to himself. But something felt wrong. At 12:45 in the morning, Devin drove to Reverie Books. The building was dark and locked, exactly as it should be. Charles's green Honda Accord was not in the parking lot. Devin checked the surrounding streets, drove the route Charles would have taken home, looked for any sign of the car or of Charles. Nothing. At 1:15, Devin called Houston Police Department. The response was measured, given that Charles was an adult who'd been missing for only a few hours. Officers took a report and advised Devin to call back if Charles didn't turn up by morning. But Devin insisted something was wrong. Charles wouldn't just disappear without telling anyone. "He's the most responsible person I know," Devin told the dispatcher. "If he was going somewhere, he would have called. If his car broke down, he would have found a phone. Something happened to him." By 6 in the morning on October 10th, when Charles still hadn't come home or made contact, Houston police escalated the case. Detective Sarah Williams was assigned to investigate. Her initial report noted concerning elements. Subject is 22 years old, responsible adult with steady employment and close family ties, no history of erratic behavior, no known personal conflicts or mental health issues, failed to return home after work, vehicle missing, has not made contact with family or roommate despite multiple attempts to reach him. Circumstances warrant immediate investigation. By mid-morning on October 10th, the missing person investigation was in full swing. Charles's parents drove from Austin to Houston, arriving by noon, their car packed with recent photos of Charles to distribute. The Witherspoon family, Devin, and friends from the writers' group began distributing flyers throughout Montrose showing Charles's photo and description of his vehicle. They covered every coffee shop, every bookstore, every restaurant and bar. Local news stations picked up the story by the evening news cycle. The Houston Chronicle ran a piece in the Sunday edition. The description circulated widely. 22-year-old male, brown hair, hazel eyes, 5 feet 11 inches tall, approximately 165 pounds, last seen wearing blue jeans, black t-shirt, glasses, driving green 1992 Honda Accord, Texas license plate Delta Charlie Victor 529. The community response was immediate and powerful. Montrose in 1999 was a tight-knit neighborhood known for its artistic community, independent spirit, and diversity. By Sunday afternoon, volunteers had organized search parties that walked every street, every alley, checking dumpsters and abandoned buildings. Local businesses posted flyers in their windows. Coffee shops became informal meeting places where volunteers coordinated efforts. The bookstore became an unofficial headquarters for the search effort, with Margaret Sullivan providing coffee and sandwiches to searchers. "Charles is one of us," Margaret Sullivan told KHOU News. "This neighborhood takes care of its own. We're not stopping until we find him." Through the weekend of October 9th and 10th, the investigation expanded rapidly. Police obtained phone records from the bookstore and Charles's apartment, looking for any unusual calls or patterns. They interviewed everyone who had been in the bookstore that Friday, calling customers whose credit card receipts provided contact information. They spoke with every member of the writers' group, all of Charles's co-workers past and present, his girlfriend Jessica, his professors from the University of Texas. Officers checked hospitals and accident reports throughout the Houston area. They entered Charles's vehicle information into state and national databases. By Monday, October 11th, investigators had interviewed over 50 people and collected surveillance footage from 4 businesses near the bookstore. Yet Charles Witherspoon and his green Honda Accord remained missing. "When someone goes missing like this, we follow every possible lead," Detective Williams explained at a press conference on October 12th. "We are treating this as a critical missing person case. We need anyone who saw Charles or his vehicle Friday night to contact us immediately. Any detail, no matter how small, could be crucial. We know he left the bookstore at approximately 9:46. We know his vehicle was seen on Montrose Boulevard around 9:55. We need to know what happened after that." As October 11th turned to October 12th, the investigation took a dark turn. A Houston Police Patrol unit responding to a call about a suspicious vehicle in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse in the 5th Ward, several miles from Montrose, discovered Charles's green Honda Accord. The vehicle was locked and appeared undamaged from the outside. Officers ran the plates, confirmed it was Charles's car, and immediately called for investigators. Detective Williams arrived at the scene within 20 minutes. What she found would transform the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide. Inside the locked Honda Accord, slumped across the front seats, was the body of Charles Witherspoon. He had been shot twice in the chest at close range. The medical examiner would later determine he had been dead since late Friday night, likely within an hour or 2 of leaving the bookstore. The vehicle showed no signs of forced entry. Charles's wallet was missing, but his watch and a ring he always wore were still on his body. His glasses were still on his face. Most puzzling to investigators, there was no blood spatter pattern consistent with the shooting having occurred inside the vehicle. The blood evidence indicated Charles had been killed elsewhere, then placed in his car, which had been driven to the 5th Ward and abandoned. For the Witherspoon family, the discovery brought a grief so profound it defied description. The hope that Charles might be found alive, hope they had clung to for 3 days despite growing dread, was destroyed in an instant. "We knew something terrible had happened," Patricia Witherspoon would later recall. "But nothing prepares you for the moment when police tell you your son is gone. Nothing prepares you for that." Robert just collapsed. "Sarah and Marcus were driving from San Antonio and Austin to be with us, and I had to call them and tell them their brother was dead. Those were the hardest phone calls I've ever made." The homicide investigation that followed was extensive and exhaustive. Investigators processed Charles's Honda for evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, finding none except Charles's own on surfaces where prints could be lifted. They collected trace evidence, fibers and hairs that were analyzed and cataloged. They photographed every inch of the interior. No murder weapon was recovered. The lack of blood evidence inside the car indicated Charles had been shot somewhere else. But where? Witness Jennifer Martinez, who had seen the Honda pulled over on Montrose Boulevard with someone at the driver's window, became a critical witness. Under repeated interviews, she provided more details. The person talking to the driver had been male. She was fairly certain, possibly wearing dark clothing, but she hadn't seen his face clearly. She hadn't thought to note the person's height or build because the scene had appeared benign at the time, just someone asking for help or giving directions. She hadn't noticed any other vehicle nearby. Investigators theorized that Charles had been pulled over, possibly by someone impersonating a police officer or claiming Charles had a problem with his vehicle. He had been forced from the car or lured from the car, taken somewhere nearby, shot, then placed back in the vehicle which was driven to the Fifth Ward and abandoned. But who would kill Charles Witherspoon? The investigation into his personal life revealed no enemies, no conflicts, no dangerous associations. Charles was universally described as kind, quiet, thoughtful, and well-liked. He had no known involvement with drugs or criminal activity. His financial records showed modest savings from his bookstore wages and no suspicious transactions. He owed no one money. He had no gambling debts. The lack of motive was baffling. Family members were investigated thoroughly and cleared. Devin Martinez had been at the apartment all evening, confirmed by phone records showing calls he made to friends and to Charles's pager. Charles's parents had been in Austin, with neighbors confirming they'd been home that evening. His siblings had alibis. All cooperated fully and passed polygraph examinations. The focus shifted to robbery as a possible motive. Charles's missing wallet suggested theft, but why kill him for a wallet that likely contained minimal cash and a couple of credit cards? Charles typically deposited the bookstore's daily receipts in a night drop on Mondays, so he wouldn't have been carrying significant money. Why murder someone for such a small score, and why move the body? The crime scene staging suggested someone trying to distance the murder from its actual location, to buy time, to obscure evidence. By the end of October 1999, investigators had conducted over 200 interviews, processed extensive physical evidence, and pursued every lead generated by tips from the public. Charles's murder received significant media coverage. The Houston Chronicle ran multiple follow-up stories exploring the mystery of his death. Crime Stoppers offered a reward for information leading to an arrest. Local television news programs featured segments on the case, yet no arrests were made. No suspects emerged. The case went cold. As 1999 turned to 2000, the investigation stalled despite continued effort. The Witherspoon family held a memorial service for Charles in November at a church in Austin. Over 300 people attended, friends from childhood, classmates from the University of Texas, members of the writers group who drove from Houston, co-workers from Reverie Books. He was buried at Austin Memorial Park. His room in the apartment on West Alabama remained untouched for months because Devin couldn't bear to pack it up, couldn't face the finality of boxing up Charles's books and clothes and writing. The writers group dedicated their annual anthology that year to Charles's memory, publishing one of his short stories with a dedication that read, "For Charles Witherspoon, and who loved words and believed in their power to change the world." Through the 2000s and into the 2010s, the case remained officially open, but without active leads. Every few years, Detective Williams, who carried the case until her retirement in 2015, would re-examine the evidence hoping new forensic techniques might reveal something previously missed. But unlike cases solved by DNA breakthroughs, Charles's murder had no biological evidence to retest. No blood or saliva or skin cells from an unknown assailant had been recovered. The bullets recovered from his body were too damaged for ballistic comparison to any database. The case seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. The Witherspoon family never stopped seeking answers. Robert and Patricia became advocates for victims' families, working with Houston Crime Stoppers and speaking at events about unsolved homicides. They lobbied for increased resources for cold case investigations. Every October 9th, they held a memorial gathering at Reverie Books, which remained in business under new ownership but never forgot Charles. A small plaque near the register read, "In memory of Charles Witherspoon, who loved books and the people who read them. We needed people to remember him," Sarah Witherspoon would tell reporters year after year. not just as a murder victim, but as a person, as someone who loved books and writing, who had dreams and plans, who made people feel heard and valued. We needed him to matter beyond the tragedy of his death. By 2020, 21 years after Charles's murder, the case files had been transferred to Houston Police Cold Case Unit. New detectives reviewed the investigation periodically, but the trail was ice cold. Witnesses from 1999 had moved away or passed away. Physical evidence had been preserved meticulously but offered no new revelations with current technology. The case seemed impossible to solve. Then in September 2024, everything changed in a way no one could have predicted. Detective James Chen had joined Houston Police in 2010, 11 years after Charles was killed. By 2024, he was an experienced cold case investigator who had made solving Charles's murder a personal mission. I read through the entire case file a dozen times, Chen would later explain. Something about it stayed with me. This young man with his whole future ahead, killed for no apparent reason, and nobody ever held accountable. The randomness of it, the senselessness, it haunted me. In early September 2024, Chen received a phone call that would break the case wide open. The call came from an attorney named Michael Rodriguez, who represented a client currently in hospice care dying from pancreatic cancer. The client, Rodriguez explained, wanted to make a confession about a murder committed 25 years ago. The client's name was Raymond Tucker, age 68, a longtime Houston resident with a criminal history including armed robbery convictions in the 1980s and early 90s. Tucker had been in and out of prison but had been living a relatively quiet life since his last release in 1995. Now, facing his final weeks of life, Tucker wanted to confess to killing Charles Witherspoon. Detective Chen met with Tucker at the hospice facility on September 12, 2024. Tucker, gaunt and weakened by cancer, barely resembling the mugshots in his criminal file, provided a detailed confession that answered 25 years of questions. According to Tucker's statement, given with his attorney present and recorded on video, he had been prowling Montrose on the night of October 9, 1999, looking for robbery targets. He had recently relapsed into drug use after years of sobriety and needed money. He had spotted Charles leaving the bookstore, followed him in his own vehicle, a white pickup truck he no longer owned, then pulled alongside Charles's Honda on Montrose Boulevard. Tucker had impersonated a police officer, a tactic he'd used successfully in previous robberies years before. He claimed there was a problem with Charles's taillight and instructed him to pull over. When Charles complied and rolled down his window, Tucker had pulled a gun and ordered him out of the car, demanding his wallet. Tucker claimed he had only intended to rob Charles, to take his money and let him go. But when Charles resisted and tried to run, Tucker panicked and shot him twice. Charles had collapsed on the sidewalk. Tucker, terrified of going back to prison, had forced Charles's body back into the Honda, driven both vehicles to the Fifth Ward where Tucker had an acquaintance with a storage unit, and hidden Charles's Honda in the storage unit while he decided what to do. Tucker kept Charles's wallet, taking the $43 inside and throwing the wallet itself into a bayou. He kept the gun used in the shooting. 2 days later, after learning police were searching for Charles and his vehicle, after seeing his face on the news and realizing the extent of what he'd done, Tucker drove the Honda to the abandoned warehouse and left it there, wiping down surfaces but apparently missing some areas or leaving prints that were too smudged to be useful. The storage unit, Tucker revealed, was still rented under his acquaintance's name, a man named Marcus Williams who had since died. The gun he had used to kill Charles was still there, hidden in a box Tucker had never retrieved, too afraid to go back for it, too afraid to dispose of it properly. Detective Chen immediately obtained a search warrant for the storage unit Tucker identified. On September 14, 2024, investigators opened the unit and found exactly what Tucker had described. Among decades of accumulated junk, old furniture, boxes of mildewed clothing and forgotten belongings, was a locked metal box buried under old furniture. In that box was a 9mm handgun. Ballistic testing confirmed it was the weapon that had fired the bullets that killed Charles Witherspoon. Also in the box was Charles's wallet, his driver's license still inside showing his smiling face, and several items of Charles's that had been in his car the night he died, including a notebook containing his writing, a book of poetry by Pablo Neruda, and a CD case. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Raymond Tucker was immediately arrested and charged with the murder of Charles Witherspoon. The arrest, 25 years after the crime, made headlines across Texas and appeared on national news. For the Witherspoon family, the phone call from Detective Chen came on September 15, 2024. "We've arrested the person who killed Charles," Chen said. "After 25 years, we finally have answers. We know what happened. We know who did it. We have evidence." Patricia Witherspoon, now 73 years old, collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing with an intensity that frightened Robert. Robert Witherspoon, 75, stood silent for a long moment, unable to process the words he'd waited a quarter-century to hear, had almost stopped believing he would ever hear. Sarah and Marcus, Charles's siblings now in their late 40s with children of their own who had never met their uncle, held each other and cried. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It wasn't closure. It was something more complicated. Validation that the truth could still emerge after all these years. Grief that Charles was still gone and would always be gone. And anger at 25 years of stolen time. 25 years of not knowing. 25 years of Raymond Tucker living while Charles was dead. Raymond Tucker never stood trial. His cancer progressed rapidly. He died in hospice care on October 3, 2024, 6 days before the 25th anniversary of Charles's murder. His confession, the recovered evidence, and the ballistic match closed the case officially. Though there would be no trial, no jury verdict, no formal sentencing, the truth was known. The Houston Police Department held a press conference on October 9, 2024, exactly 25 years after Charles Witherspoon was killed. "This case demonstrates that we never give up," Police Chief Troy Finner stated. 25 years later, justice was still pursued. Charles Witherspoon mattered. His family deserved answers, and we never stopped working to get those answers for them. Detective Chen's persistence, his willingness to take a call from an attorney about a dying man's confession, led to the resolution of a case that many thought would never be solved. For the Witherspoon family, Tucker's death meant there would be no trial, no opportunity to confront him in court, no victim impact statements read before sentencing, no formal justice in the traditional sense. But they had something they'd lacked for 25 years. The truth. They knew what happened to Charles. They knew why he died. They knew it wasn't his fault, wasn't anything he did or didn't do. He had simply encountered evil on an ordinary Friday night. On October 9, 2024, the 25th anniversary of Charles's death, the Witherspoon family held a memorial service at Reverie Books. Over 200 people attended, including Devin Martinez, now 50 years old and still living in Houston, members of the original writers group who had never stopped meeting, former co-workers, and Detective Chen. "We finally know what happened," Patricia Witherspoon said in her remarks. "Charles didn't die because of anything he did. He died because he encountered evil on an ordinary Friday night. But he's not forgotten. He'll never be forgotten. He mattered then, and he matters now." The case closure brought peace of a sort to the Montrose community, which had never forgotten Charles even as the neighborhood changed around them. Reverie Books established a permanent memorial display honoring Charles, including some of his writing and the book reviews he'd published in small literary magazines. The writers group, still meeting after 25 years with some original members and many new faces, dedicated their annual anthology to his memory once again. Detective Chen, whose persistence in maintaining contact with Tucker's attorney led to the confession, received recognition from the department but deflects praise. This was about Charles and his family, Chen reflected. About making sure that even 25 years later, the truth came out and Charles got justice, or the closest thing to justice we could achieve. That's what we owe every victim. If this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Every week we explore cases like Charles's, stories of families who refuse to give up, and the unexpected ways truth can finally emerge. Your support helps ensure these victims are never forgotten. 25 years is an impossibly long time to wait for answers. But for the Witherspoon family, the waiting finally ended. Charles can rest in peace, knowing the truth was uncovered and his killer faced accountability, even if only in his final days. And for every other family still waiting for answers about a lost loved one, Charles's case offers something precious: hope that truth, no matter how long buried, can still come to light.